This is week 2 of a 7-week series about meals. Meals with the Master is what I think I'm going to call this series. It's begin to fit into that category. I haven't quite put it on paper yet, but I think it's close to being on paper for this series. We're going to look at 7 of the meals that Jesus took part in the book of Luke. So today we are looking at one of those famous ones. So when you talk about Jesus and meals, a lot of people think of the feeding of the 5,000. It is in all of the Gospels. It's kind of one of the super stories. So those stories that make it into all 4 Gospels, it gives a stronger credence to their actually being true for scholarly people. But it's one of those things where feeding 5,000 peoples, it would cause me great panic if 5,000 people showed up for dinner tonight at my house. I think it would for you too. Now, for some of you, maybe it wouldn't, but for me, it would. So, how does this happen? How do you end up with 5,000 dinner guests? So, Jesus and his disciples decide to get away. They're just before this story, they're working, they're healing, they're teaching, and Jesus says, "Let's get away. We can't even enjoy a meal together. There are people pressing in on us. Let's go. Let's load up the boats. We're going to go." So they get in their boats from Capernaum and they begin the trip over to Bethsaida. And if you've ever looked at pictures or if you've ever had the great joy of being there on the Sea of Galilee, it is easy to see boats out on the water. And if people on shore knew that Jesus got in that boat, if they were up in the hills just a little bit, and there are a lot of hills that surround that part of the Sea of Galilee, they could have easily seen the direction that Jesus was going, and the crowds followed him. Now, I don't know about you, but when I go on vacation, the last thing I want is work following me on my vacation. Now, sometimes that happens. It happens to some of us. For others, we're lucky enough that we could get away, but for me, sometimes that occurs. Sometimes I'm on vacation and work follows me. And so when my phone rings and we're on vacation, my family does the stop and stare, like, is he going to answer it, and is it going to take him away? Look. And so Jesus and the disciples get to Bethsaida, and the crowds have followed them there. And I don't know if the disciples were like my kids, but my kids always said to me, "You don't have to deal with that, do you, Dad?" I'm sure the disciples said, "We don't have to deal with these people, do we?" But we see at the beginning of this reading that Jesus welcomes people there. So he begins to teach, and he heals, and he is the Jesus that we have come to know and love in the Scriptures. Very loving, very caring and concerned about the people around him. 5,000 people. So let's go here. It says 5,000 men, so some scholars will say 10,000. Other people say there's no way that 5,000 people were even in that area, let alone followed him along the shoreline. So let's assume it's like the creative counting that occurs in some situations in our world. Like in politics. When there's a group of people, if somebody wants a bigger number, they just inflate it. Church attendance, that happens to occasionally too. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but you look around the room, you count the number of people, you look on the board, and you go, that's not the number of people who are here. Church attendance is that way sometimes too. in some churches, it gets inflated. It happens. We're all human. We make allowances for people coming in late. I know none of you would ever come in late, but there are some people who do. And so when we hear this number, 5,000 people, we think, well, there couldn't have been 5,000 people there. All right, I'll give you that. Let's say there was half that many people there. 2,500 people. 2,500 people present. Let's say, well, there's no way that can be. Okay, I'll give you that. Let's say there were just 1,000 people there, or maybe 700 people there. It doesn't matter how many people were there. The reality is they didn't have enough food to feed the people who were there. And so at the end of the day, the disciples come to Jesus and they say to him, send these people away. You're a nice guy, you've taught them, you've healed them, but they got to go, right? It's kind of like when that person visits your house that you don't like, but your spouse does like. You got anybody like that? Or that your kids like, but you don't like, or that you like and your kids don't like? You know, that person. So you're hearing from another side, they got to go. Psst, hey, we got someplace to be. They've got to go so we can get there. So the disciples are saying, hey, it's getting late. They've been here all day. They're going to be hungry. They're going to want you to provide food, and we don't have any. And Jesus' response is really what this message is all about. He turns to his disciples. He doesn't say, don't worry, boys, I got this covered. He doesn't say that. He says, you feed them. Can you pull up verse, I think it's 12? He doesn't mince any words here. One more slide forward. 13. You, not me, not, okay, boys, I got this. You give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. What a directive for the disciples. You give them something to eat. That's the same directive that God gives to us today. You give them something to eat. It is amazing all of the different ways that you, the people of St. Paul's, help other people. I spent a little time looking at it this week. There are people here among you who make sure that the items that you bring in for food pantry get delivered every month. And do you know that all the way through this pandemic, even when we were not meeting, you continued to give food to those who needed to eat? You gave them food. And sometimes it's just that simple. It's just getting the job done. So I began to look at some of the areas that you help give them food. There's a program here in Elida where kids on Friday have their backpacks filled with food. So they'll have something to eat on the weekend. It's called Meals Till Monday. It's a simple concept. Kids who have a need are determined. They're added to the program. And then volunteers go in and they pack food into their backpacks so the kids don't have to look like they're getting special help. They just go home with their backpack like every other kid for the weekend. But in their backpack is food. Simple things. Breakfast, lunch, for the days that they're going to be at home, Saturday and Sunday. So simple. You help support that program with your offering and your gifts. We have a food pantry that we not only donate food to, but we donate money to. We have our Daily Bread Soup Kitchen, which provides a meal for those who are in need. We we do wait a minute. I'm trying to think. The family shelter. Oh, give me the name. Just drew a blank. What is it? Family Promise. We do that. So, every quarter, Family Promise sends people to a local church that we help feed. They go to Emmanuel. So these families come to Emmanuel, and we provide an evening meal for one day. Our day is Friday evening, and we provide the meal for Friday evening. And so I've been a part of that because I like to cook. And so I have enjoyed being a part of that, and always I start out thinking I'm going to do the whole meal, but then there are people who volunteer. And this last time we did it, they didn't stay at Emmanuel. They were staying at a hotel in Lima, and okay, we're supposed to provide a meal. So a main dish, a side, a vegetable, a drink. Simple, right? When we showed up, the lady had to go and get a cart to haul in everything that had been given for this meal, quote unquote meal. They probably had enough desserts. It was 3 families, maybe 4. There was a 4th individual. So there's 3 families and 1 individual. There was probably enough desserts for 7 meals for that many people. There were snacks for probably 10 days. There were cases of water. We were supposed to bring a drink with the meal. We brought cases of water plus the drink that was with the meal. There were, I think I counted 5 sides and the main meat. I hope they had refrigerators, is all I'm saying. You gave them food. It starts off simple, and it becomes huge. Now, I'm sure that the waters were kept for later, and the snacks were kept for later, and the desserts, the ice cream and the cake and the cupcakes and the cookies, in case somebody didn't like cupcakes. That was the excuse that I got anyways. And it was all because of you. You gave them something to eat. You give them something to eat. You help them here in our community. There are a lot of ways that we feed people here in our community. And I want to encourage you to continue to be a part of giving them something to eat. But not everybody's like me. Not everybody likes to make a meal. Like I had fun barbecuing the chicken that I sent to those families for Family Promise that night. I have fun doing that. I enjoy it. But where else can you give them something to eat? So, I didn't ask these people for permission to use their story, but I'm going to use it anyways because you need to know. So, one of the people I want to talk about is my wife, and the other one is Jamie. So, how can you give them something to eat if your thing isn't cooking? So we have this ministry here. We make ramps. You've seen it happen before. And the first time I experienced it, it was one of those amazing moments. They said, show up at 4 o'clock and we'll have the ramp done by 8. And I'm like, how can you build a ramp in 4 hours? But I showed up and it was like a jigsaw puzzle. And the mastermind behind it, Mr. Wyant, does it without even thinking now. He's got a program. He puts it into the program. It tells him what boards to have, how to cut them, where to place them. And he just tries to keep us, the people who volunteer to come and help, on track. That is his biggest problem. Keeping those of us who are volunteering on track and not letting us make changes to the design that he has on paper and in his brain. It's amazing when it happens. And it happens over and over and over and over and over again. I believe we have 2 or 3 waiting to be built right now. We're waiting for lumber. And he uses his skill, his gift, to give them something to eat. It's not food, but the joy when you see somebody use a ramp to get into their home is incredible. It's a wonderful feeling to watch somebody wheel up a ramp into their home for the very first time. It's amazing. The joy that's on their face, the joy that's on their family's face, the change that it brings. They're there, they're hungry, they have a need, and we fill it. Well, it's all good and well for somebody who does big things, but you're not a big thing person. You're not used to leading people. You're not used to working in groups. What is it you can do? For those of you who know a little of her story, my wife, by profession, was a teacher. She was a teacher in Michigan for 14 years. And when we moved to Ohio to go into ministry, she stopped being a teacher, and she was a stay-at-home mom, and she homeschooled our kids. She loves to teach. It is something she enjoys. It makes her tick. It makes her go. She uses her gift to help other people, and it helps her find fulfillment. You see, that's the amazing thing about gifts. So, when our children decided a couple of years ago to go back to public school, because we give each of our kids that option when they reach a certain age, you can homeschool or you can go to public school, and our 2 youngest decided to go to public school. My wife found herself, for the first time in years, unemployed. She didn't know what she was going to do. And so she went back to her first love, her teaching, and she went back to school so that she could get her teaching license here in Ohio. She had to take some classes to become current. And she took those, and she passed those classes, and she now has her teaching license. And for the last several years, she's been working in the school system. She was a brailleist. She brailled for a young man for a year. And then last year, she started substitute teaching. And people say to me all the time, wouldn't she be happier if she was a full-time teacher? And she and I have had that conversation. And if you're a full-time teacher, you have to do everything. You have to fill out all the paperwork. You have to go to all the meetings. You have to do parent-teacher conferences. You have to do all of those things that aren't teaching. But as a substitute teacher, when she walks into the room, she does one and only one thing: help kids. Doesn't matter if it's kindergartners or if it's high school kids. She substitutes for all of them. She substitutes here in Elida. She substitutes in Spencerville. She substitutes wherever she's needed. And it has been amazing, the change in attitude of my wife from that time when she was unemployed after my kids went back to school until she was back in the classroom. And there is joy in her life because she is following that directive. You give them something to eat. She enjoys helping kids learn. It's amazing. Now there are kids who come up to her and say, Mrs. Scannell, Mrs. Scannell. I have no idea who these kids are. Their parents look at me strange, like, what is your wife doing with my kid? And I'm like, well, what's your kid doing with my wife? From these little kids who come up and give her a hug around the leg, to big kids, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, who say hello to her or tell her thank you. She has that opportunity to help them and to give them something to eat. You see, when Christ gives us that directive to give them something to eat, like the disciples, if we follow the directive, we end up with a bounty coming back to us. You see, the disciples had the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and they said, this is all we have. And he said, it's enough. And he blessed it, and he broke it, and he gave it to the crowds, and the crowds ate, and they gathered up what was left over, and it filled 12 baskets. I don't think it's a coincidence that that 12 is there. One for each of the disciples. It filled them. They, the disciples, gave them something to eat. And in return, the disciples were filled. People who do things, people who help out in soup kitchens, get a lot more back than they give. People who deliver food to people get a lot more back than they give. When you build a ramp, the people who are there building the ramp get a lot more back from the people who receive the ramp. My wife, when she teaches, gets a lot more back because she has the ability to put her gift to work. So the question becomes, what is it that you can give? What is it that you can do that can give them something to eat? The disciples saw the miracle there in that place at Bethsaida when 5,000 people ate. And remember what I said? It doesn't matter how many people you think were there. Even if there were only 1,000, that's a lot of people to feed with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And if there was 10,000 people there, which is what some scholars believe, because it was 5,000 men, and they believe there were as many women and children, it's an even greater miracle. And you can be a part of that if you continue to give them something to eat. So be looking. Maybe you're already doing it. Share it with your friends. Let them know what it is that you're doing. And look for those moments, because they happen. In the moments when you're doing what it is that you do, you have an opportunity to see the miracle that is God when you give them something to eat. Will you pray with me? God of grace and mercy, we give thanks for your miracles and for your meals. Lord, give us the courage to step out in faith and to feed your people, to put our gifts to work for you, knowing that we will get more in return than we ever could give. And in so, grow your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Break thou the bread of life, dear Lord, to that loves beside the sea. Beyond the sacred page, I seek thee, Lord. My spirit pants for thee, O living word. Bless thou the truth, dear Lord, to me, as thou didst bless the bread by Galilee. Then shall all bondage cease, all fetters fall, and I shall find my peace, my all in all.
Go forth from this place and give them something to eat. Amen.